H. Holmes. On May 7, 1896, 34-year-old Herman Webster Mudgett, known publicly as H. Holmes, was walked to the gallows at Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Holmes had built a 3-story hotel in Chicago with hidden rooms, sealed chambers, and a cremation furnace in the basement. He had confessed to 27 murders, though investigators believed the real number ran far higher. He had lured victims in with job offers, marriage proposals, and charm. He slept soundly the night before his execution. Guards had to call him twice to wake him. He ate boiled eggs, dry toast, and coffee, met with 2 priests, and walked to the scaffold without hesitation. He showed less nerves than most men facing a parking fine. At the gallows, he calmly told the crowd he had only caused the deaths of 2 women through botched medical procedures. He shook hands with his lawyers. He turned to the executioner and said, "Take your time, old man." The trap dropped at 10:12 a.m. His neck did not break. Holmes strangled. His body hung and twitched in silence for 15 full minutes while 60 witnesses stood watching. His heart kept beating weakly. The prison physician waited. Eventually, Holmes was cut down and pronounced dead, 20 minutes after the drop. Before his execution, he had demanded his coffin be packed in wet cement and buried 10 feet underground. He was terrified someone would dig him up and dissect him. The man who had spent years cutting other people apart spent his final moments begging not to be cut apart himself. Joseph Vacher. On December 31, 1898, 29-year-old Joseph Vacher was woken in his cell at Bourg-en-Bresse prison in France at 6 a.m. Vacher had murdered at least 11 people across the French countryside between 1894 and 1897, mostly teenage shepherds tending flocks alone in open fields. He stabbed them. He mutilated their bodies. He moved on to the next town. For 3 years, nobody caught him. He told the guards that morning that he had committed no crimes. He was an innocent victim of society. He refused to confess to the prison chaplain. Outside, 3,500 people had gathered on the Champ de Mars to watch him die. Guards came to transfer Vacher to the guillotine. He refused to stand. He refused to walk. He threw himself face first onto the floor of the prison transport vehicle and screamed. 2 executioners dragged him out by his arms. The crowd roared when they saw him. They screamed, "Cut off his head! The coward! The Ripper!" Vacher was still struggling and shouting as the executioners pinned him onto the bascule, the tilting board that locks a prisoner flat under the blade. He was still shouting when the knife dropped. His head fell not into a basket. His sister had sent a small wooden coffin to catch it. The crowd applauded. A post-mortem examination of his brain concluded he was completely sane. Every single murder had been a choice. Dean Corll. On August 8, 1973, 33-year-old Dean Corll was shot dead on the floor of his own home in Pasadena, Texas. Corll had never been arrested. He had never stood in a courtroom. For 3 years, he had been abducting, torturing, and killing teenage boys across Houston and paying 2 local teenagers, David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, cash money to bring him more victims. On the night of August 7th, Henley brought 2 friends to Corll's house, a boy and a girl. Corll only wanted boys. All 3 teenagers fell asleep from paint fumes and alcohol. When they woke, they were handcuffed. Corll told Henley all 3 of them were going to die, including him. Henley talked fast. He told Corll he would help with the other 2. Corll thought about it and removed Henley's cuffs. He handed him a knife. Henley grabbed Corll's .22 pistol instead. He pointed it at Corll. Corll laughed and walked toward him. Henley fired 6 times. Corll staggered toward his telephone. He collapsed trying to crawl through his sliding glass door and died on the floor. Henley called the police and led them to 3 separate burial sites. The bodies of 28 boys were dug up. At the time, it was the highest confirmed murder count in American history. The man who ran a candy factory and handed out sweets to neighborhood children was shot dead by the teenager he had spent years grooming. The student had finally turned on the teacher, Nestor Pirot. On July 29, 2000, 67-year-old Nestor Pirot died of a heart attack inside his cell at Gemmeul prison in Belgium. Pirot had killed at least 3 people and was suspected of 4 more murders carried out between the 1950s and 1980s. He bludgeoned his victims with iron bars. He targeted antique dealers and wealthy restaurant owners. He charmed his way through front doors by pretending to be an aristocrat, introducing himself as a count, wearing tailored clothing, and speaking with refinement. He had been sentenced to death twice. Both times the sentence was reduced to life imprisonment. He had attempted to escape multiple times. Once he threw himself off a 6-meter wall to fake a medical emergency. It did not work. By 2000, he had spent nearly 4 decades inside Belgian prisons. Other inmates kept their distance. Prison staff considered him the most dangerous man in their custody. His health had been in slow decline for years. On the afternoon of July 29th, Pirot returned to his cell after making a phone call. He lay down on his bunk. His heart stopped. No family came. His funeral drew one attendee, an elderly woman who had known him as a boy. Belgium's self-appointed aristocrat, a man born to a gamekeeper who spent his whole life pretending to be someone grander, was buried in an unmarked plot in a small cemetery outside Ham-sur-Heure. No title, no stone, nothing. Andras Pandy. On December 23, 2013, 86-year-old Andras Pandy died inside the prison infirmary at Bruges, Belgium. Pandy was a Hungarian-born Protestant pastor living in Brussels. Between the late 1980s and early 1990s, he had murdered his 2 wives and 4 of his own children. He used a hammer. His daughter Agnes helped him carry it out. The bodies were dismembered, dissolved in acid, or dumped near a slaughterhouse on the edge of the city. No remains were ever recovered. For years, nobody suspected a pastor. He filed missing persons reports. He produced forged letters from his wives claiming they had emigrated. He provided false testimony. He kept preaching. It was Agnes who broke. She went to police in 1997 and described every killing in detail. Officers searched Pandy's former property and found blood on the walls, human bone fragments, and traces of flesh. He was arrested that year, convicted in 2002, and sentenced to life with no parole. In prison, he told psychiatrists repeatedly that he had done nothing wrong. He was moved to Bruges when his health began failing. He turned 86 inside a cell. He was given medical care in the prison infirmary. On December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, he died quietly. No final words, no confession, no acknowledgement. The pastor who dissolved his own family in acid slipped away without a sound and took every answer with him. Harold Shipman. On January 13, 2004, 57-year-old Harold Shipman was found hanging in his cell at Wakefield Prison in West Yorkshire, England. Shipman had worked for decades as a family doctor in northern England. He murdered his patients by injecting them with fatal doses of diamorphine during routine home visits. He sat with their families afterward, offered condolences, and signed the death certificates himself. An independent inquiry concluded he had killed at least 215 people. Most of them were elderly women who trusted him completely. He was caught because he forged a patient's will and left everything to himself. Shipman was convicted in 2000 and sentenced to 15 life terms with no parole. He refused to cooperate with investigators trying to identify remaining victims. He refused to confess. Hundreds of families were left with no answers. On the evening of January 12th, guards assessed him and noted no immediate risk. He was left alone. He used his bed sheets. He tied them to the window bars and fashioned a noose. The next morning, guards found him. The date was not random. His 58th birthday was January 14th. Under NHS pension rules, a prisoner's spouse receives a larger lump sum if the prisoner dies before their 58th birthday. By dying on January 13th, Shipman secured his wife the maximum payout, over £100,000 plus a lifetime weekly allowance. Britain's most prolific serial killer. His last act on earth was calculating his wife's pension. John Wayne Gacy. On May 10th, 1994, 52-year-old John Wayne Gacy was strapped to a gurney at Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois and prepared for lethal injection. Gacy had murdered 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978. He buried 26 of them under the floorboards of his own house. He spent 14 years on death row painting self-portraits as a clown and selling them to collectors. He gave interviews insisting he had been framed. On the day of execution, he ate a final meal of fried chicken, French fries, and strawberries. At 12:58 a.m., the warden read the death warrant. He asked Gacy for final words. Gacy looked at the room and said, "Kiss my ass." The injection began. Within minutes, the IV line clogged solid. The chemicals had hardened inside the tube. The execution stopped. Technicians worked for 15 minutes with a replacement line while Gacy lay strapped to the table. When the injection finally ran, Gacy lost consciousness in seconds. He was pronounced dead at 12:58 a.m., 18 minutes after the process started. Outside the prison, a crowd had gathered. When the announcement came, they cheered. The man who performed as Pogo the Clown at children's birthday parties died sneering on a faulty gurney. Peter Sutcliffe. On November 13, 2020, 74-year-old Peter Sutcliffe died at University Hospital of North Durham, England. Sutcliffe, known as the Yorkshire Ripper, had murdered 13 women and attacked 7 more across Yorkshire and Manchester between 1975 and 1980. He told police God had spoken to him through a gravestone and commanded him to clean the streets. He was sentenced to 20 life terms in 1981. He spent years in a high-security psychiatric hospital before being transferred to a regular prison in 2016. In October 2020, Sutcliffe contracted COVID-19. The virus moved through the prison wing quickly. Sutcliffe was 74 years old with underlying health conditions. His lungs began to struggle within days. Doctors offered treatment, a ventilator, intensive care, every available option. Sutcliffe refused all of it. He told staff it was God's will that he die. His breathing worsened over several days. Fluid built steadily inside his lungs. His oxygen levels fell. His body labored with each breath. He was conscious through most of it, refusing every hand extended toward him, repeating that God had decided. On November 13th, Peter Sutcliffe drowned slowly inside his own chest. A helpless, grinding death stretched across days. While choosing every moment not to stop it, the man who spent years claiming divine instruction died exactly the same way, following orders. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.